Okay, may as well get started here. Um, did anyone have problems yesterday with their terrain, or did they make their terrain? Anyone? Yeah, it works, ish.
We made something, we don't know if it's right or not.
Okay. There was another, I guess, point I should have mentioned too. That what might have helped your guys' terrain be a little more accurate. Just to get those edges coming down properly, you could just bring all of your, just copy all of your points down, whichever increment you've put your, whatever increment you have for your elevation changes. Just copy them down one more time so that the points are going down like that instead of just from there to there, because then it has more of a path for the actual patch to go on. So if your patch wasn't working out properly, just try doing that. So for this one, I just made it a little more, just a simple model of Santorini because it's quite an elevation change. And I put a path in there just so that we can kind of see how to move the path into the Illustrator file for the laser cutting. So first thing, we're just going to do the manual version of it. For this elevation change. Obviously this is, I'm going to make it as simple as possible, so you're going to get fewer actual stacks of material, but when you do yours you have to keep in mind that it's probably not great to have huge changes in between your material if you have really thick material. So just like yesterday, pull the contour command out and so contour and then just put the direction, so you're going from top to bottom or bottom to top. I'm making these ones at 1,000 millimeters. We can change the scale and everything in another program. I'm just loosely going off of what I know this model is scaled at, just so that we can pull off dimensions into Illustrator, or pull off, sorry, curves into Illustrator. So now I have each of the contours, which I will move over just by using the gumball. All of these contours have now, okay, never mind, let's try it again.
Did it just crash?
It just crashed. Not sure why. I'm also using the trial version and it's kind of shitty on Mac. Okay, contour. Oops. Oh my god, that's gonna be bad. Sorry. Okay. One more time.
Did it work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Have a bit of time. All right. So now we have all of these contours in their separate pieces. In order for me though to take this little pathway that I've created and project it onto these pieces. Right now they're just lines, curves, so there's nothing to actually project onto. So I'm just going to select all of these contours and then change or make them into an actual surface. So if you go to Surface and Planar Curves, then it changes all of these into, so now these are all separate surfaces. So then if I take this curve and then just move that over the same distance, and then I can project this. Now, when I project this, the only problem is that it's going to project this line work onto every single one of these layers, which we don't necessarily need, but in the end it will help us line everything up. So project, and then select all of the surfaces again, and then you can see that it's projected that road onto each of these separate surfaces. So now essentially we have each of the pieces that we're going to be laser cutting, but obviously it's not that hard to move each of these because there's not very many of them, but if you have a file that has a whole bunch of contours, there's an easy kind of trick to move that, like spread them all out so you can actually use them, which is the shear command. But first, if you just draw a line from somewhere in the center of the project, straight up, and then grab everything but that line. And type in shear. And you want to grab the base of that line we just created to the top of it. Oops, sorry. Oh my god. Okay, this thing's a little finicky. So let me try that again. So what this command is going to do is it's going to take everything on each of the z-axes and spread them all out. So as long as everything is on a level plane, it should spread all of your separate pieces out. There we go. Okay, so that's just the curve. This one's the one that we used before, but we don't need that. So now you can see each of your panels that we're going to be cutting. And actually, so I guess this is the most basic way that you can spread out all of your pieces, and then we can start laying them out onto whichever format of material you guys are using. But one of the things that would probably help you guys out is, I know a lot of you guys talked about putting reference points of where each of the layers stack on top of one another, or even if you don't want to take this whole piece and cut out the entire piece, you want to kind of hollow it out underneath. Just go and project these lines or these curves onto the surfaces below. So then once we actually get into the file on Illustrator of all of these, we can change these layers and just do a slight laser etch instead of a cut through the entire piece. So if you were to go down and do that on You can keep going down and do that on each separate layer. I don't want to do that because it's time consuming, but you guys get the point. Does everyone know what I mean for that? Yeah, okay. So we'll just spread those out again.
When you do the shear command, does it
Mhm.
keep it at the same Z height or
Yeah.
okay?
Keeps at the same Z height, which won't matter when we export this to Illustrator. We're just
It just
exporting.
flattens it anyway.
Yeah, so that won't matter.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, so it doesn't. This doesn't warp your line work or anything, unless your line work is going down the z-axis, which we can see that one path was actually going down the z-axis, so that was all warped, but we don't need that. So we have this one, which will allow us to place, and this one, which we can place. So if you guys want to actually do that with your models, that's one of the ways that you can. You can do it one of two ways. You can start laying out, people lay out and just make their framework for their material on here and start placing each of the pieces. I prefer to just do that in Illustrator, but however you want to do it. So I'm just going to go and export. It's different on this guy, but if you can export the selected geometry, there we go. And we want to export it as an AI file for Illustrator. And we want to, we want to keep the same scale usually. Well, you want to scale it in your head. I haven't scaled any of these. I'm just kind of guessing all the numbers, but typically I'm going to scale it for the type of model I'm having, or I'm going to make. So if I'm going to make a 1:1000 model, I'm going to change it so that there's 1000 millimeters or whichever it is.
Also, one thing that I find about doing it this way is that you should probably like put the panels closer to the corner, just the bottom left corner, because then otherwise it'll disappear somewhere on the artboard in Illustrator and you can't find it.
Yeah, so if you just go move and then move that to 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, then that's the true 0, so it's going to actually export in the correct place when you go into Illustrator, because it does float off the page.
Mm-hmm.
And you may even want to take some of these panels just so it's not extending across the page, because Illustrator also doesn't like that. Okay. Anyway, so we'll just export that.
So you guys got that export selected?
Okay. So then if we just head into Illustrator and open up our file that we just made. As you can see, they're enormous, so
So we're gonna go back and
yeah, we might.
export.
We
That's
can, because
something
this
else.
probably isn't going to work.
Well, you know, you can always try and scale this down in Illustrator, but it'll always say that it's gonna fall off the artboard. So you pretty much have to go back into Rhino and redo the scale. Hey, it works for you.
No, I don't think it did. Okay.
No?
No.
Okay.
Yep, so let's head back in here, and we are going to rescale this. So might have done that backwards.
Okay.
There we go. So now we have our super small pieces.
But at least we can scale them up
Yeah.
this time.
Again, I'm not doing it to any particular scale, which is the wrong thing to do, but it's just quicker at this point. So first thing that will actually probably help is, so the one laser cutter, the old one, you're supposed to have your sheet, your artboard set out to 32 by 32, even the bed's 32 by 18. It just prevents a lot of errors. So if you just go into the artboards and change that to 32 inches by 32 inches, and then you can always pull your guide down, although this is in metric, so
Somewhere in
gonna-
the middle.
yeah, say that's 18. So now we just have to manually move all of these pieces around. What you can do in either you probably should be doing this in Rhino just because it makes it easier when you pull it into Illustrator. It's not the end of the world though. Is things that you're etching. So each of these paths, we're going to need to make them a separate color because that's how the laser cutter works. It works on color. So I'll just grab each of these. And that. This is assuming that we don't want to cut the roads out. Blind. See the layers panel? Oh, it's right there.
So you
Wow.
don't necessarily need to create a different layer for that. You just need to change the color, right?
Exactly, but I guess the way I work is I like to have everything in separate layers just in case you need to turn them on and off or
Right.
do whichever.
True.
But we'll just change that to pathway and move those to that layer. So now all of these are on a separate layer and we can actually change the color of them, which is what we'll need to do anyways. They do need to be true colors. So you just need 255 for red. Is it RGB or CMYK that it works off of with that laser cutter? Or
I think
both?
it's RGB.
Oh, it's actually, sorry, it is actually both. So you can do,
Oh, it is?
yeah, it has all 7 true colors. So black, green, blue, indigo, blah, 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 blah. And our file that we made before, because they were planes, they just have these ISO curves on them. That's another thing that you should be doing in Rhino, is that when you have all of these selected, if we just select one of these, there should be a thing. Where's the ISO curve button? Okay, well,
Maybe not in this version.
okay, so in the PC version on the properties panel, there is a button right around here that you can turn off the ISO curves so that you don't actually have to manually go through and delete them. But it will only take 2 seconds, so we will just delete these off here.
Oh, that's from it being a surface.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess conversely, at that point, you could delete all the surfaces that were in Rhino and export it without the.
Yeah, you could do that as well. Either or, actually, just double check that. Yeah. So, Kat's probably right. We should have done that because when we're bringing this in, now we have double line work. It's just because I had the curve that I brought over and the surface. So now if I didn't catch that before we actually cut it, the laser cutter would pass by twice, which we really don't need. So basically all the rest of this is just manual manually moving each of these pieces around so that you can kind of fit as many of these pieces onto one artboard as possible. While you're doing this, you may choose to, I mean, it is pretty easy because these ones are just going to get smaller and smaller, so you know which ones are which. But if you have a really complicated model that goes up and down in all different directions and a lake and stuff, I would recommend putting numbers on each of these.
Mm-hmm. That helps a lot.
But let's say this, actually move this on down. So we definitely have enough room, we have enough room to make all of our pieces on one 32 by 18 sheet. Oops. Okay, so we'll just save this because we need something to cut. Oh shit. We need something to cut on the laser cutter later. This isn't being very precise, but close enough, right?
Yeah. For the
Don't
purposes of
ever do what I'm doing right now for your actual laser cut. Okay, and then just.
You label them if you've got an intricate model. Do you just
So say for instance this piece that we know that this is going to be the only, like this portion of it is going to be the only visible side. We can put the number on this side just so that we cover it up with the other panel. But what you could do as well, I should have, I guess, shown you, if we kept going down with all of these lines projecting on the pieces below, a good way to do it is if you want that hollow model, instead of cutting out each piece over top of one another in a huge stack, just project two of the previous layers down, use one of the layers or one of the lines as the this red line to line things up, and use the other line to cut so that you have enough enough material to glue together. So the other thing that the laser cutter needs as well, I know the old one does, I'm not sure about the new one, but it has to be at like 0.001 or 0.01 line work, otherwise it won't recognize it. And just saved as an Illustrator file because that's what it opens up as. So we'll just save that.
I think on the new one it has to be backsaved to CS3.
Right. So when you save it, the other one does as well. So when you save this, just save as normal, replace, and go into Illustrator here and back save or down save. Okay, and then basically we have that file then that we're going to be cutting. That was the manual way of doing it, and that took about a half an hour with a very, very simple model. So it's a little time consuming. If you guys also, if any of you are working on the PC side and have your own Rhino version, there's a plugin called Rhino Nest. And it basically takes all of these slices that you've made and you can automatically nest them into laser cutter panels that you set up in the program. There's tutorials online that you guys can take for that, but that's also a simple way of doing that as an alternative to this and an alternative to the next method I'm going to show you.
Do you know those tutorials right off?
If you just Google Rhino Nest contour tutorial, it should pop up pretty easy. So
let's say that model is 2 laser beds, 1.
Uh-huh.
Is there a way to split that? I guess we have like the file you brought in yesterday was our entire model, and that's 2 laser bed
Yeah.
widths. So if I do that same thing, the sheared, lay it all out, then I've got essentially my entire model. Is there a way to cut that in half?
Yeah. So just like the other commands we kept doing with the project, just slice it right down the middle with project, and you'll have those 2 perfect squares, and then they can just come into one another. Yours should be fine because you have the lake that's almost right centered, but if more people have tiled panels, you can just go ahead with the project command and separate all of your different panels that way. Okay. So for the other way I'm going to show you, you need a program called 123D Make. It's free online and it's part of the Autodesk program. But for this, you need to have an OBJ, so you can save or export it as an OBJ file, just the model itself that you've made, so the terrain and the block of it. So that closed poly surface we talked about, that's what you're exporting as an OBJ. It also accepts another type of file, but I forget what that is. Okay. So this program's pretty simple. It's a bit finicky and a little problematic, but the amount of time it saves you if you have a complex model is definitely worth it. So you just go up here to import that OBJ we just brought in. And there you can see our model right there. And then it gives you a whole bunch of different construction techniques that you're going to send to the laser cutter. Actually, first off, we should probably figure out the object size. If you just bring it in as what I think we were in millimeters in that model, so if I change it to millimeters and original size, it's going to be absolutely enormous. But you can go in here and manually change everything as well. So let's just go like this. Height, and I don't know, we only want. So the material we're using is, I forget what Damon said, but it's a 1/16 of an inch thick. So I don't know, I can just guess that I want this model to be, I don't know, 3 inches high. Alright, there's our super tiny model. So then again, we can select the construction techniques. It can do a whole range of techniques to cut kind of a grid shell pattern of it or do whatever. You can change the degree that you're cutting these slices at. But for this, we just need the stacked slices. And then it takes all of the slices that you need and then automatically puts them onto sheets for you. But right now it's only putting them on letter. I have the laser bed already saved on here. And then right now I have it set to a very thin paper, but we need 1.5 millimeters, which is still a lot. Let's just bump this up just to show you, I guess, what it would look like. Let's use 20 millimeters. Ooh, 10. Maybe 5. Okay, so you can keep playing around with that and kind of get something that you like. And then it automatically shows you that this is going to be, like it numbers them for you, and then it shows you the line of the previous layer. So we're pretty much done here, and it was really that easy. But on this, you can play with the settings and you can change which material you're using quite easily. I forget where it is in here, but if you play around in here,
Why is number 2 kind of weird?
number 2, because number 2 is, so there's 2 of these
Oh,
layers
I get
stacked. Technically, you don't need number 1, so when this
Okay.
pumps out, you can just erase number 1 from the sheet so it doesn't cut it. Actually, I don't know if it, yeah, we can't do it in here. So we just go here to the simple layout, click this button, and we can export it. We need to export it as, you can export it as EPS or PDF, it doesn't matter. We're going to open it in Illustrator though, and just make sure everything's in order.
So the contours that it cut look pretty janky. Like number 8
Yeah.
has like some.
So all of those were, when I made the model, I made it to show you, I was going to show you guys if we had a whole bunch of thinner layers, but we just don't have time for that. I actually cut the road out of the terrain so that it was more like what you guys were going for, so that you could just place a laser cut road on top of it.
Right.
So that's why these are, I mean, normally you wouldn't have that, but it was just the model we're
Okay, so
working with.
That's
Yeah, it's technically supposed to be like that, but anyway, so yeah, export it as an EPS, and yeah.
You have to sign into Facebook to use this.
Well, you can sign up for an account. This was just the easiest that I did, so do whatever you want. I don't care. But it's only like, it's just a free account, and you can, once you have the account, you can save your models so that you can go back. If you ever run into a problem, you can go back and actually see what piece is missing or what piece messed up. So,
So do you have it saved so that it automatically moves everything a half inch in for the
Yeah.
old laser cutter?
So on this, you can go back to what's the
Your sort of
layout?
template.
Your template here, and where was it?
Wouldn't you just make the laser bed dimension half inch smaller than 32 by 18, and then that sheet that it would be setting up would inherently be.
You could, but there's margins on here, and it's super easy to change. The other laser cutter actually cuts properly and goes right to whatever margin you want. But it is in here. The settings here, I think. There we go. Yeah, so you can change all your margins here. Right now it's at 0.2 of an inch. But these are where all, oh, actually it's down here. So this is the setting for the laser bed. The margins are huge on it. They don't need to be that big, but we fit all of our pieces on the one anyways, so it doesn't really matter.
That's just required for the old laser cutter.
Not really. Like, we're going to be taking it into Illustrator right now, and we can put it to whichever corner we want. The new laser cutter has a computer program that allows you to kind of zoom into which area you want a laser cut, whereas the old one is just offset for some reason and it cuts in a weird spot.
Do you lose any quality by using this?
Yeah, you probably lose a little bit of quality, but it obviously depends too how many layers you're doing, like what the increment is. But it in general, I would say that like it's even picking up these little roads that I had before, which they should be. So I wouldn't say it's really losing any quality, especially for what you guys are doing. The amount of precision that's needed isn't actually that much. No one's going to notice that there's a little rock missing or something. So when you go back into Illustrator and just open this up, it's already labeled everything for, oops. We just have to change or make sure that it's not Okay, so change it back to the bed size, or 32 by 32, sorry. And so the border that it has on here is already at 32 by 18, so we know where that is. We don't, so if you go and just ungroup everything, you don't need this line, otherwise it's gonna start cutting it.
Mhm.
So we can just change it to all black. And then each of the other ones, you just need to double check that they're true red or true blue, which this one is. Yeah, we're fine. And again, just make sure that the stroke is all 0.01. The old laser cutter sometimes has a problem with the. That's the one that it has to be in RGB, I think, for the old laser cutter. So when you save it or down save it, if it isn't working for you on the old laser cutter, you just have to make sure. Where's my colors? You just have to make sure that it's in RGB, which this one is. So it would be fine. So save, and again down save that one. So, I mean, in comparison, you're looking at half an hour versus 10 minutes. You guys can choose whichever. This one, I guess, yeah. So running through this one, the only problem is that it doesn't have the roads or houses or anything that you can project on there. It'll just take the actual form itself. So you're missing out on that portion of it.
Mm.
Oh, and obviously for this, you would want to move things like, you'd have to separate it and move that 2 over, because that's,
I think it'd be hidden.
huh?
I think it'd be
It's
hidden.
crossing the line.
Yeah, because this is where the,
Cutting that off and the other piece would be over top.
no, so the other piece goes over top of this part, but then the 2 would still be sticking out. But yeah, other than that, it's fine. Yeah, any questions?
Why does it say like 5 minus 1 and 12 minus 1?
Because some of the pieces have 2 parts to them. This one, I'm not really sure what would be in 2 parts. But I've done complicated models where it's on the same plane, it's just 2 different parts. This one shouldn't have that.
Yeah. So it's like, it's 5, 5. So that's what
Cool.
And so, if you are etching the houses on, you just said you put those on different layer or different color.
Yeah, I put them on well, I mean, I would probably put them on, depending if I'm going to actually cut out the footprint of the building. I'll either have them as blue for cut or red for etch.
Right. Okay.
But that's something that you would only be able to do in the manual portion of it. You wouldn't be able to do it on this quick program, which is kind of unfortunate.
Well, I guess you could if you modeled the houses and they all became part of the solid, but that's still not really that
Yeah.
accurate.
Yeah, so they were talking to me yesterday about wanting to do that and have the buildings a different material than the landscape, which works. But if you guys decided that you wanted the buildings and the landscape all in one, you just put it all into one big closed poly surface, and then it'll cut out the houses with the terrain.
Yeah, like you could
Yeah.
Boolean,
Yeah.
not split, but what's the other?
Boolean union. You can Boolean
Or
union.
subtract even like a footprint so that you can embed like a wood structure in
Yeah.
it. So that would be
That would work too. So you have the
Interesting.
edge of it. But in terms of roads and things like that, unless you actually do this proper with the roads cut out, obviously you'd need more layers for that. But that's one way of cutting out roads, and then just laser cutting a piece that goes on top. But as for etching roads or just marking them out, it's not going to work on the 1, 2, 3D make, but it will work on the manual.
Yeah.
So, is Damon in here?
He was here. Took off. Probably he's in.
Yeah, so he's probably in the laser cutter or laser room, getting everything set up. I don't have. I might have one actually. Do any of you have a USB stick that they want to use?
I could steal one.
Oh wait, never mind. I found one. We're all good. Oh shit! I think I saved this one as an EPS file. Or did I? Oh no. Are you all ready for us, Damon?
Yeah.
Okay. You said we're just using the big one? Just the big, or the new laser cutter, sorry?
Yeah.